Millionaire marries an ugly maid for a bet, but what he discovers on their wedding night shocks him. The $2,000 whiskey burned in Alexander Thompson's throat as he watched Manhattan through the windows of the exclusive Skyline Club on the 86th floor. The city lights sparkled like diamonds scattered on black velvet, a spectacle he hardly noticed anymore after so many years at the top of the financial world. "You're getting too predictable, Alex," Richard Wellington teased, swirling his Baccarat crystal glass. "Same car, same club, same women. Where's that guy who used to surprise everyone?" Alex adjusted his $800 Hermes tie, a cocky smile playing on his lips. The table was surrounded by his usual drinking companions, Richard Wellington, heir to an oil fortune, Marcus Blackwell, real estate tycoon, and James Harrison, a Wall Street shark like himself. "Maybe I've finally found the perfect formula for life," Alex replied, but his words sounded empty even to his own ears. "Perfect," Marcus laughed, leaning forward. "You're just bored. Look at you, 35 years old, billions in the bank, and the only person who cleans up your mess is that dull maid of yours." Alex thought about Miller for a moment. It was true that she didn't attract attention: brown hair, always tied up in a severe bun, simple conservative clothes, and those scars on her face that she tried without much success to hide with makeup. Still, there was something about her. Speaking of her, James interrupted his thoughts. "I bet even you, with all your charm and money, couldn't make that woman fall in love with you." The alcohol had clouded Alex's judgment enough for those words to touch his ego. "Do you really think there's anyone in this town I can't win over?" Richard picked up his cell phone, his fingers dancing over the screen. "Let's make this interesting then. $10 million says you can't marry her and keep the marriage going for a whole year." Silence fell across the table like a heavy curtain. Alex felt the bitter taste of provocation on his tongue, mixed with the expensive whiskey. $10 million? Are you crazy?" Alex laughed, but his eyes shone with interest. "What's the matter, Thompson? Afraid of losing?" Marcus teased, knowing exactly which buttons to push. The next morning, with a hangover hammering his temples, Alex watched Miller. No Miller. He needed to start calling her Miller, organizing his stainless steel kitchen with his usual quiet efficiency. The scars on his face seemed more pronounced in the morning light, running down the right side of his forehead to his cheek. "Miller," he called, his voice softer than usual. She turned around, surprised at the different tone. "What's your first name again?" "Miller." "Miller," she replied, a shadow of distrust crossing her face. "You've never asked before." "Well, I'm asking you now," he smiled, trying to look charming despite his headache. "And please call me Alex." Miller studied him for a moment, his brown eyes revealing an intelligence he had never noticed before. "Is there a problem, Mr. Thompson?" "Alex," he corrected gently. "And no, there's no problem. I just realized that you've been working for me for 2 years, and we've barely met." She continued her work, moving with deliberate grace around the kitchen. 3 years, actually. "And getting to know your employees never seemed to be a priority of yours." The answer took him by surprise. There was a hint of challenge in her voice that he hadn't noticed before. "Interesting." Over the next few weeks, Alex executed his plan with the same precision he applied to his financial negotiations. Small gestures at first, a breakfast prepared especially for her interest in her routine, casual conversations that became more and more personal. What he didn't expect was to discover that Miller had strong opinions on art, politics, and literature, that she had a subtle and sharp sense of humor, that her scars had a story, one that she refused to tell, but which occasionally appeared in her eyes as she gazed out of the window, lost in thought. It was during one of these moments of contemplation that Alex made his decisive move. "How about dinner with me tonight?" Miller froze the coffee cup he was cleaning, hanging in the air. "That wouldn't be appropriate, Mr. Thompson." "Alex," he insisted. "And why not?" "Because you're my boss, and because people like you don't go out with people like me without an ulterior motive." Her eyes met his with an intensity that made him recoil internally. "What if I said I wanted to get to know you better simply because you intrigue me?" A sad smile played on his lips. "Then I'd say you need better hobbies than trying to solve the mystery of the scarred maid." The answer hit him like a punch in the gut. For the first time since the bet began, Alex felt a twinge of guilt. But $10 million? He'd already gone too far to give up now. "Miller, I'm not trying to solve any mysteries. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes people surprise you when you take the trouble to really look at them." Something in his words seemed to strike her. Miller studied him for a long moment before replying, "Dinner." And if you make any comments about transformation or hidden potential, I'll leave." Alex smiled, ignoring the voice in his head that said he was about to make a terrible mistake. "Agreed. And Miller, thanks for giving me a chance." "Miller," she corrected softly. Miller." As he watched her return to work, Alex wondered at exactly what point his carefully crafted plan had started to become complicated by something dangerously close to real feelings. Lou Bernardine shone with its characteristic elegance as Alex nervously adjusted his Armani jacket. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely anxious about a date. Miller had agreed to have dinner with him, but his conditions were clear: no fancy restaurants. Of course, he didn't listen. When Miller arrived, Alex almost didn't recognize her. She was wearing a simple but elegant navy blue dress that looked as if it had been tailor-made for her. Her hair, normally tied up, fell in soft waves down her shoulders. The scars on her face, which she usually tried to hide, were on show, a decision that puzzled him. "I said no extravagance," were her first words, her eyes scanning the luxurious surroundings with disapproval. "Technically, you told me not to comment on transformation or hidden potential," Alex replied with a smile. "You didn't mention anything about the choice of restaurant." Miller sighed, but there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Always the devil's advocate, aren't you, Mr. Thompson?" "Alex," he corrected, automatically pulling out the chair for her. "And sometimes the devil needs a good defense." The sommelier approached with a wine list, but Miller politely dismissed him. "Just water for me, thank you." Alex watched her curiously. "You don't drink?" "Not on dates with my boss," she replied with a meaningful look. Someone needs to maintain mental clarity here. The conversation flowed surprisingly well. Miller turned out to be an excellent listener, and more surprisingly, an even better conversationalist. She had strong opinions on social politics, an infectious passion for Renaissance art, and a deep knowledge of literature that caught him off guard. "Like a maid," Alex began, but was interrupted by Miller's sharp gaze. As a person, she corrected firmly, "I believe that education and culture are not class privileges, but fundamental human rights." Alex felt his cheeks burn. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did," she interrupted him again, but her voice was gentle. "People always want to know how someone in my position can have certain characteristics that they consider exclusive to their social bubbles. It's a prejudice so deeply rooted that they don't even realize it when they express it." The silence that followed was heavy. Alex rummaged through his food, feeling uncomfortably exposed. The bet with his friends suddenly seemed even more despicable. "Why the scars?" he asked abruptly, trying to change the subject. Miller lightly touched the right side of his face. "Do you want to know how I got them, or why I chose not to hide them tonight?" "Both," Alex admitted. "The scars are a story for another day," she replied, her eyes distant for a moment. "As for not hiding them, let's just say I decided that if you really want to get to know me, you should see the whole truth from the start." Her honesty hit him like a punch in the gut. Here he was planning an elaborate seduction scheme for money, while she offered total transparency. "You're different from what I expected," Alex confessed. "And you're exactly as I expected," she replied with a small smile. "But maybe there's hope for you yet." The rest of dinner passed in a mixture of lively debates and moments of comfortable silence. When the bill arrived, Miller insisted on paying her share. "It's non-negotiable," she declared, placing her card on the tray. "Equality means equality in every respect." On the way home, Alex offered her chauffeur-driven car, but Miller refused. "I'll take the subway. It's how I keep my feet on the ground. Can I at least walk you to the station?" She nodded, and they walked side by side through the streets of Manhattan. The silence between them was different now, charged with something Alex couldn't define. At the station entrance, Miller turned to him. "Thank you for dinner, Mr. Thompson." "Alex," he corrected, once again, his heart racing inexplicably. "No," she smiled, "not yet." And with that, she disappeared down the stairs, leaving Alex standing on the sidewalk, observing the empty space where she had been. In his apartment that night, Alex couldn't sleep. Miller's words echoed in his mind, mixed with the voices of his friends at the club that bet the money. For the first time in his life, $10 million didn't seem so much. His phone vibrated with a message from Richard. "How's the plan going with Cinderella?" Alex stared at the screen for a long moment before putting the phone away without answering. Something had changed that night, and he was no longer sure what game he was playing or if he even wanted to play it. The Monday after dinner, Alex found his penthouse strangely silent. In Miller's place, there was only a formal note informing him that she had to go away for a few days due to an unavoidable personal commitment. It was the first time in 3 years that she had missed work. Disturbed by the unexplained absence and the lack of additional information, Alex found himself searching his own apartment for clues about her life. That's when he found hidden behind a shelf in the utility room a small yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline made him freeze. Young volunteer risks life to save children from fire at community center. The photo showed Miller, a younger, unscarred Miller, smiling in front of a building. The article detailed how she had rushed into a burning building to rescue 3 children trapped on the 2nd floor. "So that's it," muttered Alex, feeling a mixture of admiration and shame. The scars he and his friends had ridiculed so much were medals for heroism. Impulsively, Alex decided to investigate further. A quick online search led him to the Sunrise Community Center in the Bronx, where the incident had taken place. Without thinking twice, he canceled all his meetings for the day and drove there. The center was a modest but well-kept building. At the reception desk, an elderly woman welcomed him with a warm smile. "I'm looking for information about Miller," Alex said, feeling out of place in his $3,000 Italian suit. The lady's eyes lit up. "Our dear Miller, she's here, right now in the art room. It's a school day for the children." "Art class?" Alex asked, confused. "Yes, she gives free classes twice a week. Come on, I'll show you where it is." Before Alex could protest, the lady led him down a corridor decorated with children's drawings to a bright room. Through the window in the door, he saw something that would change his perspective on Miller forever. She was there wearing a paint-stained apron, surrounded by about a dozen children. Her face was animated, the scars almost invisible under the glow of her joy as she helped a little girl mix colors on a canvas. "Miller has always been special," the lady commented softly. "Even after the accident, she never stopped coming. She said that if she couldn't be a volunteer firefighter anymore, she'd find other ways to make a difference." Alex watched in silence, noticing how the children treated her with adoration, how she laughed freely, a sound he had never heard before, and how her hands moved confidently as she demonstrated painting techniques. "Those are hers," the lady pointed to a series of canvases hanging on the back wall. Alex approached, awestruck. They were impressive portraits capturing not just the appearance of people, but something deeper, their essence. "She has a special gift," the lady continued. "She sees beauty where others cannot." One of the portraits in particular caught Alex's eye. It was a painting of 3 smiling children, the same ones she had saved from the fire. Below was a small plaque, "My rescuing angels, sometimes we need to lose something to gain so much more." "Miss Thompson," a familiar voice called from the doorway. Alex turned to find Miller standing there, paintbrush in hand, an expression indecipherable. "What are you doing here?" The elderly woman discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone in the now empty room the children had left for recess. "I found the article," Alex admitted, "about the fire." Miller sighed, putting the brush aside. "And you decided you needed to investigate." Typical Wall Street, always wanting all the details before making a move. "That's not it," Alex protested, even though he knew it was partly true. "I just wanted to understand." "What exactly?" Miller interrupted him. "Why would someone choose to work as a maid when they have a talent for art? Why don't I wear makeup to hide my scars? Why do I live a life so different from what you consider normal?" Her words hit him like a slap. "Miller, do you know what the irony is?" she continued, her voice softer now. "The fire taught me that sometimes we need to lose something to discover who we really are. I lost my perfect skin, but I gained a completely new perspective on beauty and value." Alex looked at the paintings again, then at Miller, seeing her truly for the first time. "They are extraordinary. You are extraordinary. Please don't do this," she pleaded wearily. "Don't turn me into some kind of redemption project or inspirational story. I'm just a person trying to do his bit in the world. And I'm just an idiot who's starting to realize how much time he's wasted judging books by their covers." Alex replied, the guilt over the bed weighing more and more heavily on his chest. Miller studied him for a moment, then smiled slightly. "Well, at least you admit you're an idiot. It's a start. A start for what?" Alex asked, his heart racing inexplicably. "To learn to see beyond appearances," she replied, picking up a new brush. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a class to prepare for, and you have a financial empire to run." Alex left the community center that afternoon feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier. The image of Miller teaching art, his face illuminated by genuine passion, wouldn't leave his mind. The $10 million bet, which had once seemed like a fun game, now left a bitter taste in his mouth. In his Wall Street office, he found several messages from his friends asking about the progress of his project. Alex ignored them, all preferring to spend the afternoon researching art programs for underprivileged communities. For the first time in his life, Alex Thompson wondered if perhaps he was the one who needed a makeover. The discovery of Miller's real work at the community center haunted Alex for days. In his meetings on Wall Street, he would find himself absent-mindedly drawing in the corners of his financial reports, recalling the precise strokes of the paintings he had seen. "Thompson, are you listening to us?" The irritated voice of one of the directors brought him back to the reality of the boardroom. "Of course," he replied, automatically closing the folder where he had unconsciously sketched a profile of Miller teaching art to children. "Go on." But his mind was far from there. The $10 million bet now weighed on his conscience like lead. The night before, Richard had sent a message asking about progress. "Have you put a ring on Cinderella's finger yet?" Alex didn't reply. Instead, he spent the evening researching the Sunrise Community Center and discovered that they were about to lose their funding for the arts program. An idea began to form in his mind. The next day, Miller returned to work as if nothing had happened. Alex watched her through her office door as she methodically organized the living room. "Why didn't you ever tell me about your paintings?" he finally asked, breaking the silence. Miller continued folding a blanket, her voice calm but firm. "Because my personal life is not part of my employment contract, Mr. Thompson. After everything, am I still Mr. Thompson?" She turned to face him. "What exactly is everything? Sir, a dinner, an unsolicited visit to the center? Or is there something else I should know?" Alex's heart raced. For a terrible moment, he thought she had found out about the bet. "I just want to get to know you better." Why, the question was simple, but loaded with meaning. Alex opened his mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. How could he explain that what had begun as a cruel game was turning into something real and frightening? "I have a proposal," he said instead. "The community center needs funds to keep the arts program running. I can help." Miller's eyes narrowed. "I don't need charity, Mr. Thompson." "It's not charity," he insisted. "It's an investment in a community. No conditions, no strings attached. The program would continue exactly as it is with you in charge." "And what would your role be in all this?" Alex hesitated. "Maybe I could learn something about art too." To his surprise, Miller laughed, a genuine sound he rarely heard. "You want to take our lessons? Does the Wall Street shark want to learn how to paint?" "Why not?" Alex smiled, feeling strangely vulnerable. "Maybe it's time to develop new talents." Miller studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher a particularly complex puzzle. "The classes are on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. If you want to join, you'll be treated like any other student. No special privileges." "I agree with the terms," Alex replied, trying to contain her enthusiasm. "And about the funding," she continued, "I'll need to see a formal proposal. The center has a board of directors who need to approve any significant donation." Alex nodded, impressed by her professionalism. "I'll have the documents ready by tomorrow." "One more thing," Miller added, his voice softening. "Why are you really doing this?" The question caught him off guard. Alex could have lied, could have given a polite corporate answer about social responsibility. Instead, he chose a partial truth. "Because for the first time in a long time, I found someone that makes me want to be a better person." The words came out before he could contain them, and for a moment, he saw something flash through Miller's eyes: vulnerability, perhaps, or hope. "Careful, Mr. Thompson," she said softly. "You're beginning to sound like one of my students at the center, full of unrealized potential." With that, she went back to work, leaving Alex with the distinct impression that he had just passed some kind of test, although he wasn't sure if he had passed or failed. That evening, Alex received another text from his friends at the club. "Meeting tonight to update on the bed." He stared at the text for a long moment before replying, "Can't make it. I have art class." Switching off his cell phone, Alex adjusted his tie and grabbed his jacket. For the first time in his adult life, Wall Street would have to wait. He had a more important appointment in the Bronx and a crucial decision to make about a bet that was beginning to look more and more like a colossal mistake. Alex never imagined he would feel nervous walking into a classroom. Wearing jeans and a casual shirt, clothes he barely remembered owning, he arrived at the Sunrise Community Center 15 minutes before the start of art class. The room was already different from what he remembered from his last visit. Easels were arranged in a circle, and in the center was a table with a simple arrangement of fruit and various objects. Miller moved around the space, adjusting the lighting and distributing materials. "Mr. Thompson," she greeted him with a nod without interrupting his preparation. "That's your easel." He pointed to a workstation between an elderly gray-haired woman and a teenage girl with nose piercings. "Good evening," he murmured to his classmates. The lady smiled kindly while the teenager just rolled her eyes, clearly not impressed by his presence. Miller started class promptly at 6 p.m. "Today we're going to work with light and shadow," she announced, her voice taking on a professional tone that Alex had never heard before. "The key to creating depth in a painting lies in observing how light interacts with objects." Alex held the charcoal as if it were a Mont Blanc pen, drawing discreet laughter from his classmates. Miller approached calmly. "Relax your wrist," she instructed, gently adjusting her hand. The casual touch sent an unexpected shiver down her arm. "You're not signing a multi-million-dollar contract. Art is about letting go, not about control." The irony of those words didn't go unnoticed. Control was exactly what Alex was losing over the situation, over his feelings, over the whole farce of the bet that now seemed absolutely despicable. The next 2 hours were a lesson in humility. While the lady next to him produced a delicate and precise sketch, and the rebellious teenager created something surprisingly expressive, Alex struggled to make an apple look more like an apple and less like a deformed soccer ball. "You're thinking too much," Miller commented during one of his passages. "Stop trying to make the perfect fruit and start seeing what's actually in front of you." "Easier said than done," Alex muttered, frustrated. "Like everything in life," she replied with a small smile. "Sometimes we need to unlearn in order to learn something new." At the end of the lesson, as the other students left, Alex remained looking at his work with disgust. Miller approached, studying his drawing. "You know what I see here?" she asked. "A disaster, effort," she corrected. "I see someone sincerely trying even if the result isn't what they expected." It's refreshing to see the great Alex Thompson not being immediately brilliant at something. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he asked, noticing the amused glint in her eyes. "Maybe a little," she admitted. "Consider it karma for all the times you complained about the way I organized your wine cellar." Alex laughed, surprising himself. "I never complained, your eyebrows complained. They make that particular movement when something isn't exactly the way you want it." "My eyebrows don't make any movement," he protested, but he could feel himself smiling. Miller started cleaning up the materials, and Alex automatically offered to help. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "The board approved your financing proposal," she finally said. They were impressed by the terms and the absence of conditions. "Good," Alex replied, genuinely pleased. "The program deserves to continue." "Why are you really doing all this, Mr. Thompson?" Miller asked, abruptly stopping what he was doing to stare at him. "The class is the funding." What changed? Alex felt the weight of guilt in his chest. The truth about the bet threatened to escape his lips, but the fear of losing whatever was brewing between them stopped him. "Maybe I'm tired of just being what people expect me to be," he replied, surprising himself with the honesty in his own words. "Or maybe I found someone that makes me want to be more than that." Miller studied him for a long moment, his scars looking more pronounced in the soft, late afternoon light. "Beware of implied promises, Mr. Thompson. They can hurt more than explicit ones." "What if it's not a promise but a possibility?" he asked softly. "Possibilities are dangerous for people like me," she replied, going back to organizing her brushes. "They make us forget who we are and where we came from. Or maybe they show us who we can be." Miller stopped again, a brush hanging in the air. "You're doing what I specifically asked you not to do, trying to turn me into a redemption project." "No," Alex replied, taking a step towards him. "I'm trying to be honest about how you're turning me." The silence that followed was fraught with unresolved tension. Finally, Miller put the last brush in its place and picked up his bag. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson," she said softly. "Don't forget to practice your shadows for the next class." As he watched her leave, Alex realized that he was in unfamiliar territory. For the first time in his life, all his money and power couldn't buy what he really wanted: the trust and heart of someone who could see through all his facades. In his pocket, his phone vibrated with yet another message from his friends about the bed, but he didn't even bother to look. He had more important things to think about: how to make an apple look like an apple, and how to fix a mistake that grew bigger with every moment he spent with Miller. The morning after the art lesson, Alex found a small package on his desk in the office. Inside was a basic set of drawing materials and a handwritten note to practice your deformed apples. The gesture made him smile, but the smile soon disappeared when Richard Wellington entered his office unannounced. "Alex, my friend," Richard exclaimed, throwing himself in one of the leather armchairs. "So it's true the Great Wall Street Shark is taking art lessons in the Bronx?" Alex tensed his jaw. "How did you—" "Oh, please," Richard laughed. "Do you really think we'd bet 10 million without keeping an eye on our investment? Marcus has a nephew who goes to that community center." The thought of being watched made Alex's stomach turn. "That wasn't part of the deal. The deal was for you to marry the scarred maid in a year," Richard replied, his casual tone carrying a cruelty that Alex had never noticed before. "So far we've only seen you making a fool of yourself in a community art class." "Don't talk about her like that," Alex said between his teeth. Richard raised an eyebrow. Well, don't tell me you're actually developing feelings for a little artist." "Get out of my room," Alex ordered, standing up. "Just a friendly reminder, Alex," Richard said, also getting up. 10 million is a lot of money to lose because of a sudden attack of conscience. After Richard left, Alex remained standing looking out of the window at the city below. The drawing set that Miller had given him now seemed to weigh a ton on his desk. That afternoon, breaking his usual routine, he decided to go home early. He found Miller finishing organizing his library, a task she usually did on Thursdays. "Thanks for the drawing material," he said softly. Miller turned around, surprised by his unexpected presence. "I thought you'd need something better than office paper and Mont Blanc pens to practice with." "Can I ask you something?" Alex approached, feeling his heart racing. "Why did you agree to give me lessons, the truth?" She considered the question for a moment. "Because when you asked to take the class, it was the first time I'd seen you showed genuine interest in something that didn't involve money or status." Gil hit him like a punch. "What if," he hesitated, "what if not everything I did was for pure motives?" Miller put the last book on the shelf and turned fully towards him. "Are you trying to tell me something, Mr. Thompson?" "Alex," he corrected, automatically running his hands through his hair in frustration. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake." "What kind of mistake?" Before he could answer, his phone vibrated with a message. It was a photo sent by Richard Miller teaching at the community center with the caption, "Tick-tock, the clock is ticking." Alex quickly blocked the phone, but not before Miller saw his expression change. "Is there something going on that I should know about?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of concern. "Miller, I need to tell you something." Alex began, his heart hammering in his chest. "But I need you to understand that things have changed." "I've changed?" "You're scaring me," Miller said, taking a step back. "At the club that night, my friends made a bet." The words came out with difficulty. $10 million that I couldn't marry you," Miller added, his voice surprisingly calm. Alex froze. "How? I've worked for you for 3 years, Mr. Thompson," she said, and the formal use of her name hurt him more than any shout could. "I've learned to read people, and your friends aren't exactly subtle when they drink on your terrace. Why didn't you say anything?" "I wanted to see how far you'd go," she replied, starting to collect her things. "I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, you'd prove me wrong about you." "Miller, please." Alex took a step towards her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Was the funding for the center, the art classes, all part of the plan?" "At first, yes," he admitted, hating every word. "But then when I met the real me," Miller laughed humorlessly. "The scarred maid who exceeded your low expectations, the secret artist who made you feel less guilty about taking part in that cruel bet." "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that," she interrupted him, reaching for her bag. "Do you know what the worst part is? For a moment, I really believe that you are changing. That all those conversations about seeing beyond appearances meant something." "They do," Alex insisted. "Miller, I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and irreversible. Miller stared at him for a long moment, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "No," she finally said, her voice breaking slightly. "You've fallen in love with the idea of redemption that I represent. And that, Mr. Thompson, is perhaps the cruelest insult of all." With that, she walked to the door, pausing only for a moment. "My letter of resignation will be on your desk tomorrow. And you can tell your friends that they won the bet. You really couldn't keep a marriage that never existed." The door closed softly behind her, the soft click echoing like a gunshot in the silence of the apartment. Alex stood there holding the set of drawing materials she had given him, realizing that he had just lost something much more valuable than $10 million. The days following the confrontation with Miller were the darkest Alex had ever experienced. The apartment, once impeccably organized, was beginning to show signs of disarray, a perfect metaphor for the chaos in his mind. Miller's letter of resignation, as promised, was on his desk the next morning, its formal professional words cutting deeper than any accusation. "How much do you think she heard?" Marcus asked over an unplanned lunch at Le Bernardin, the same restaurant where Alex had taken Miller on their first date. The irony didn't go unnoticed. "Enough," Alex replied, dryly munching on his food without really eating. "And honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. It's over." Richard raised his wine glass. "Well, technically you lost the bet, so to hell with the bet," Alex exploded, slamming his hand on the table hard enough to make the cutlery clink. The whole restaurant fell silent for a moment. "Don't you understand? I met someone real, someone extraordinary, and I ruined it all because of a stupid game." James, who had remained quiet until then, leaned forward. "You really fell for her, didn't you?" "Yes," Alex admitted, the word coming out as a defeated sigh. "And now she hates me. She works at the Sunrise Community Center on Tuesdays and Thursdays," Marcus offered hesitantly. "Maybe if you—" "No," Alex interrupted him. "She's made it very clear that she doesn't want to see me. And after what I did, she's right." Leaving the restaurant, Alex walked aimlessly through the streets of Manhattan. His steps took him unconsciously to the subway where he had said goodbye to Miller after that first dinner. He remembered his words about keeping his feet on the ground and realized with painful clarity that he had never really understood what that meant until now. In his pocket, the set of drawing materials Miller had given him weighed like a constant reminder of his betrayal. In an impulsive decision, he ran down the subway stairs and boarded the first train that came along. 40 minutes later, he found himself in the Bronx in front of the Sunrise Community Center. It was Thursday, and he knew that Miller would be teaching. Through the window, he could see her moving among the students, her face animated as she explained some technique. The scars he had once considered a defect now seemed to tell a story of courage and sacrifice that he had been too shallow to appreciate. "She won't want to see you," a familiar voice said behind him. It was the old lady from reception. "I know," Alex replied without looking away from the window. "I just needed to see if she was all right." "Well, his relative," the lady commented. "She smiles less now. And sometimes when she thinks no one is looking, she stares at that picture of the 3 children she saved." Alex felt his heart squeeze. "I've ruined everything, haven't I?" "Yes," the lady answered honestly. "But do you know what Miller always tells his students when they make mistakes in their drawings? That sometimes you have to erase everything and start again." "I don't think it's that simple." "Nothing worthwhile is simple, Mr. Thompson," she said, handing him an envelope. "This arrived for the center today. A sizable check for the arts program." Alex looked at the envelope, recognizing his company's logo. "I pledged to funding before. Well, before everything. It wouldn't be fair to punish the children for my mistakes." The lady smiled gently. "Maybe you're not a hopeless case after all." At that moment, the door to the art room opened, and the students began to leave. Alex retreated into the shadows, watching Miller say goodbye to each of them with a warm smile. His heart ached at the thought of never seeing that smile directed at him again. "You know," the lady continued, "Miller also started here after the fire. She was broken, scared, thinking that her scars would define who she was forever. But she found healing through art and helping others." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because sometimes we need to lose everything to discover who we really are," she replied, echoing the words Miller had used so many times. "The question is, what are you going to do with that discovery?" Alex watched Miller tidying up the room by herself, her profile illuminated by the late afternoon light. In his pocket, the set of drawing materials seemed to pulse with unrealized possibilities. "Thank you," he said to the lady, turning to leave, "for everything." "Where are you going?" "To learn how to draw apples," he replied with a small smile. "But this time I'm going to do it the right way." As he walked back to the subway station, Alex realized that for the first time in his adult life, he didn't have an elaborate plan or a calculated strategy. All he had was a box of art materials, a belated realization of what really mattered, and the hope that maybe, just like in the drawing, some mistakes could be erased for a fresh start. In his pocket, his phone vibrated with unread messages from his friends at the club, but he didn't care anymore. He had work to do, not on the financial markets this time, but on the arduous road to personal redemption. A week after his visit to the Sunrise Community Center, Alex found himself sitting in his home office, surrounded by dozens of failed attempts to draw a simple apple. The trash overflowed with crumpled paper, each sheet representing hours of failed attempts to capture something that seemed so simple when Miller explained it. The doorbell rang, interrupting his concentration. It was Richard, Marcus, and James carrying bottles of whiskey and their typical smut expressions. "We've come to settle the bed," Richard announced, entering uninvited. Alex remained seated, watching his friends settle in, as if nothing had changed. Marcus noticed the drawings scattered around and picked one up. "Are you really taking this seriously?" he asked, a mixture of incredulity and amusement in his voice. "More seriously than any deal I've ever closed," Alex replied, taking the drawing from his hands. "And no, I don't want the bed money. You can keep it." James placed his glass on the table, ignoring the cup holder. "That's not how it works, Alex. A deal's a deal." "A deal?" Alex laughed humorlessly. "It was a cruel bet made by bored men who think they can play with people's lives because they have money. I refuse to take part in it." "What happened to you?" Richard asked, genuinely intrigued. "First the art classes, now this. Where's the Alex we knew? Maybe he's finally grown up," a female voice replied from the doorway. The men turned to find the lady from the community center, Agnes, standing there with a folder in her hand. "How did you?" Alex began, surprised. "Your secretary let me in," Agnes explained, stepping forward into the room. "We need to discuss some changes to the art program." Richard opened his mouth to make a comment, but Alex interrupted him. "Gentlemen, the meeting is over. Please leave us." After a few protests and confused looks, the three men left, leaving Alex alone with Agnes. She looked at the scattered drawings with interest. "You're getting better," she commented, picking up one of the sketches. "This apple almost looks like an apple." "Almost isn't good enough," Alex sighed, running his hands over his tired face. "How is she?" Agnes sat down, placing the folder on the table. "Honest, hurt, but mostly disappointed. Do you know what's worse than being judged on appearance, Mr. Thompson? It's when someone pretends not to judge, only to reveal that the prejudice was there all along." The words hit Alex like a punch in the gut. "I didn't pretend. At first, yes, it was all part of the plan, but then you discovered that she was a real person with dreams, talents, and scars that tell a story of courage," Agnes added. "But do you know what you still don't understand? That she was always that person, even when you saw her only as the dull mate." Alex looked at his failed drawings, and new understanding dawning. "That's why I can't draw that damn apple, isn't it? Because I'm still trying to make it look like something I think it should be instead of seeing what it really is." Agnes smiled. "Now you're beginning to understand. Miller always says that art isn't about creating perfection, it's about revealing the truth." "How can I fix that?" Alex asked, his voice carrying a vulnerability that surprised even him. "I started from scratch," Agnes replied, opening the folder. "The center is organizing a charity exhibition. Local artists will donate works to raise funds to expand the program." "And you want me to donate money?" "No," she smiled. "I want you to donate your time. We need volunteers to organize the event, set up the works, serve drinks. The kind of work you've probably never done in your life." Alex looked down at his manicured hands, then at the calluses that were starting to form from holding the drawing pencil. "Will Miller be there?" "It's her project," Agnes confirmed. "But she doesn't need to know about your involvement, at least not initially." "I don't want to hide," Alex said firmly. "There have been enough lies." "Then this is your chance to show the truth." Agnes stood up, leaving a card on the table. "Monday, 8 a.m. Bring clothes you don't mind getting dirty, and get ready to work harder than you ever have on Wall Street." After Agnes left, Alex stared at the card for a long time. Finally, he picked up a new piece of paper and began another attempt to draw the apple. This time, however, he didn't try to make it perfect. He just watched, really watched, and let his hand follow what his eyes saw, not what his mind thought it should see. The result was still far from a masterpiece, but there was something different about it, an honesty that had been missing from previous attempts. It was imperfect, but it was real. Like a man who finally begins to see beyond appearances, Alex realized that perhaps the most important lesson was not in the drawing itself, but in the process of learning to truly see. And maybe, just maybe, that would be the first step towards deserving a second chance with someone who had always seen the truth in everything and everyone except the man who pretended to be someone he wasn't. On Monday morning, Alex arrived at the Sunrise Community Center wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt from the Gap, probably the cheapest items in his closet. Agnes was waiting for him at the entrance, holding a clipboard and wearing a paint-stained apron. "I thought you'd give up," she commented, handing him a similar apron. "Come on, we got a lot of work ahead of us." The center's main hall had been transformed into a makeshift exhibition space. Dozens of panels needed to be mounted, walls needed to be painted, and hundreds of works of art were waiting to be organized and cataloged. "Start by cleaning that wall," Agnes instructed, pointing to a section covered in stains and tape marks. "Water, soap, and a lot of arm strength. The tools are in the cupboard." Alex stared at the wall, then at his manicured hands, and finally at the bucket of soapy water. On Wall Street, he moved millions with a click. Here, he was about to scrub walls like a beginner. "Is there a problem?" Agnes asked, noticing his hesitation. "No," he replied, rolling up his sleeves. "I'm just trying to remember the last time I did manual labor." "First time for everything," she smiled, leading him to his thoughts in his bucket. The next few hours were a lesson in humility. His muscles, used only to the private gym, protested against the repetitive work. His back ached, and his fingers developed blisters from the constant grip on the sponge. Around midday, as he was struggling with a particularly stubborn stain, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "The stain comes out better if you use vinegar." Alex froze. Miller was standing there holding a bottle of white vinegar, her face a mask of professionalism that revealed no emotion. "Miller, Agnes told me we have a new volunteer," she interrupted him softly. "She didn't mention who it was." Alex picked up the bottle of vinegar, his fingers rubbing lightly against hers. "I wanted to help, really help this time." Miller studied her face for a moment, then the half-cleaned wall. "You're rubbing in the wrong pattern. Small circles are more effective than big movements." Before he could reply, she had already moved away to supervise another group of volunteers. Alex watched as she gently guided an elderly woman on how to position a painting, her smile genuine and patient, the same smile he had lost the right to receive. For the rest of the day, they danced this silent waltz of closeness and distance. Alex followed her indirect instructions, learning not only about exhibition preparation, but about the value of manual labor and humility. By the end of the afternoon, his hands were calloused, his back ached, but the wall was spotless. Agnes came over to inspect his work. "Not bad for a beginner," she commented. "Tomorrow we'll start assembling the panels." "Tomorrow?" Alex asked, surprised at his own enthusiasm for returning. "Unless Wall Street is more important," Agnes teased. "No," he replied without hesitation. "I'll be here." As he put his apron away, Alex noticed Miller in his makeshift office cataloging works for the exhibition. Through the ajar door, he could see one of his own clumsy apple drawings on the table. "You forgot that the other day," she said without raising her eyes, sensing his presence. "It's getting better." "Still not good enough," he replied honestly. "It's not about being good enough," Miller finally looked at him. "It's about being real." The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words and regrets. Alex took a step towards the office, but Miller held up a hand. "Please," she asked softly. "Not yet." Alex nodded, respecting her boundaries. "Tomorrow, then, to work on the exhibition," she clarified. "Nothing more." "It's more than I deserve," he replied, turning to leave. At the door he stopped. "Miller, yes, thanks for teaching me about small circles." A ghost of a smile passed her lips. Sometimes the biggest lessons come from the smallest things. Leaving the center that night, Alex looked down at his bruised hands and smiled. For the first time in his life, the blisters and calluses were not marks of weakness, but medals of a different kind of victory over his own pride. In his pocket, his phone vibrated constantly with messages from his old friends at the club and missed calls from important clients. But at that moment, walking through the Bronx night with the smell of paint and cleaning products on his expensive clothes, Alex Thompson felt richer than any trading on Wall Street had ever made him feel. In the weeks that followed, Alex established a new routine. His mornings still began on Wall Street, but at 2 in the afternoon, he would invariably change out of his Armani suit and head to the Sunrise Community Center. The transformation of the space for the charity exhibition was progressing slowly, as was his cautious relationship with Miller. "You're holding the wrong hammer," Miller commented one day, watching him struggle with the assembly of a panel. Without waiting for an answer, he approached and adjusted his hands on the instrument. "The thumb should stay here, it gives you more control." The brief contact sent an electric current through his body, but Alex remained focused on the task at hand. He had learned that with Miller, actions spoke louder than words. "How did you learn all this?" he asked, admiring the ease with which she handled the tools. "My father was a carpenter," she replied, a rare piece of personal information. "Before the accident, we used to build furniture together at weekends." And after, Miller paused, his hands hesitating over a box of nails. "Then I discovered that creating art was another way of building something lasting." Agnes appeared, carrying several wrapped canvases. "Miller, more donations have arrived for the exhibition. And Mr. Thompson, when you're done there, I need help cataloging these works." Alex noticed how Agnes still used Mr. Thompson, with a hint of irony, as if testing his reaction. Over the last few weeks, he had learned to accept these little provocations with humility. During the cataloging, Alex discovered that each work had a story. There were paintings by children from the after-school program, works by local artists, and even some canvases by former students who were now studying art at college. "This one is special," Agnes commented, unwrapping a larger canvas. It was a portrait of 3 smiling children, the same one Alex had seen the first day he visited the center. "Miller has finally agreed to exhibit it." Alex studied the painting with new eyes. The scars that marked Miller's face were the price she had paid for those smiles to continue to exist. "Why did she decide to exhibit it now?" "Because some stories need to be told," Miller replied, silently coming up behind them. "Even the ones that hurt us." The moment was interrupted by a noisy group of teenagers entering the center, students from the afternoon art class. Miller stepped aside to greet them, leaving Alex with a sense of unfulfilled progress. "She's starting to trust you again," Agnes observed. "Slowly, but she is." "How do you know?" "Because she doesn't talk about her father or the accident with anyone," the lady smiled. "And have you noticed that she doesn't move away anymore when you come closer?" Alex hadn't noticed, but now that Agnes had mentioned it, he realized that the spaces between them had gradually shrunk. Like the small circle she had taught him to use to clean stains, subtle but consistent progress. That afternoon, while the teenagers painted, Alex continued his organizational work. Occasionally, he picked up fragments of Miller's instructions to the students. "Art isn't about perfection, it's about truth. Sometimes our mistakes are what make our work unique. Don't be afraid to start again if something isn't working." Each sentence seemed directed not only at the young artist but also at him. During a break, Miller approached his workstation. "You didn't show up for the last drawing class." "I didn't think it would be appropriate," Alex replied honestly. "Art doesn't judge who can and can't learn," she said, placing a pencil and paper on his desk. The sides of your apples were starting to look edible. It was the first time she had made a joke since the bet was revealed. The small smile on her lips was like a ray of sunshine after a long storm. "Miller," Alex began, his heart racing. "I know I don't deserve." "You're right, you don't deserve it," she interrupted him softly. "But sometimes it's not about deserving. It's about choosing to do better day after day, small circles at a time." With that, she went back to her students, leaving Alex with a pencil and paper and a growing sense of hope. At the end of the day, while they were putting away their materials, Miller stopped by their side. "The exhibition is in 2 weeks. We still need someone to help with the buffet. Are you inviting me to serve canapes?" "I'm offering you a chance to show that you've really changed," she replied. "That the man who made that bet no longer exists." Alex looked at his hands, now callous from manual labor, then at Miller. "What if I screw it up again?" "Then you'll learn that some stains take more than one try to get out," she smiled slightly. "But at least you'll be trying for the right reasons this time." That evening, driving back to Manhattan, Alex reflected on how his life had changed. His phone still rang with calls from Richard and the others, but he had blocked their numbers weeks ago. His clients complained that he was less available, but for the first time he didn't care. In his once luxurious and impersonal apartment, there were now unfinished drawings of apples scattered across the coffee table. And in his mind, there was the promise of small circles patiently worked out, slowly erasing the stains of his past mistakes. The charity exhibition was just 3 days away when Alex's carefully constructed world began to crumble. He was at the Sunrise Community Center, helping to position the latest works, when Richard Wellington appeared unexpectedly, his Italian suit clashing with the modest surroundings. "So this is where the great Alex Thompson has been hiding," Richard announced, his voice echoing through the hall. Ignoring our calls to play, artist Miller, who was adjusting the lighting on a nearby painting, froze. Alex saw the exact moment when attention took over his body. "Richard, this is neither the time nor the place," Alex warned, putting himself between his former friend and Miller. "On the contrary, it's the perfect moment. Richard smiled, his eyes scanning the space with disdain. "I've come to personally deliver your check for the bet. $10 million is agreed, since you clearly failed to win over our local artist." The silence that filled the room was deafening. Agnes, who was cataloging works near the entrance, quickly approached. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," she said firmly. "But don't worry, ma'am," Richard laughed. "I just came to make a delivery." He pulled an envelope from his inside jacket pocket. "Here it is, Alex. Consider it compensation for your failed charity project." Miller finally moved his eyes, meeting Alex's. "Charity project? Miller, it's not what you think," Alex tried to explain, but Richard interrupted him. "Actually, it's exactly what she's thinking. You see, darling, Alex here decided it would be fun to try and turn the scarred Maid into a success story. $10 million to prove he could make her fall in love with him. But it seems that all the money in the world can't buy true love, can it?" "Enough," Alex shouted, advancing towards Richard, but Miller stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Let him finish," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I want to hear everything." Richard continued, savoring every word. "The funniest thing is that he's actually started to believe his own hoax. The mighty Alex Thompson in love with an art teacher from the Bronx, please." "Get out of here," Alex growled, his voice charged with an anger he had never felt before. "With pleasure," Richard smiled, dropping the envelope on the floor. "Oh, and Miller, thank you for providing a few months of entertainment for our social circle. Your attempts to fit in were lovely." Before anyone could react, Agnes had already crossed the hall and was face to face with Richard. "You have exactly 10 seconds to leave this center before I call the police for trespassing." Richard raised his hands in false surrender and backed towards the door. "I'll be right there. Good luck with your charity exhibition." The silence that followed was deafening. Miller remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the envelope on the floor. "Miller," Alex began, his voice breaking. "I can explain." "Explain what?" she asked, finally facing him. "How I was your charity project, or how you and your friends laughed at me all this time? It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that in the beginning, wasn't it?" She bent down and picked up the envelope, holding it out to him. "Here's your consolation prize for having to endure the scarred Maid's company for so long." "I don't want this money," Alex said, pushing the envelope back. "Everything's changed." "I've changed." "Changed?" Miller laughed humorlessly. "You're still the same man who made that bet, Alex. The only difference is that now you feel guilty about it." Agnes tried to intervene. "Miller, darling." "No," Miller interrupted her. "It's all right. In fact, this is perfect for the exhibition. Isn't it a beautiful story about how even the rich and powerful can stoop to playing with the feelings of the less fortunate in the name of entertainment?" "Please," Alex begged, taking a step towards her. "What I feel for you is real. What you feel is pity," she replied, her words cutting like razors. "And perhaps a little fascination with the exotic, the scarred girl who saved children from a fire, who paints portraits and teaches art to underprivileged children. It must have been quite a project for her ego." With that, she turned and walked towards her office, her back straight and her head held high, even as a tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. Agnes watched the scene sadly. "You have to fix this," she told Alex. "How?" he asked, feeling completely lost. "Starting by proving her wrong about you still being the same man who made that bet." Alex looked at the envelope in his hands, then at the direction Miller had taken. An idea began to form in his mind. "Agnes, I need your help," he said, a plan taking shape. "And I'm going to need all the volunteers we can muster in the next 72 hours. The 3 days leading up to the exhibition were a storm of activity at the Sunrise Community Center. Alex, determined to turn his shame into something meaningful, had put his plan into action with the same intensity he used to devote to trading on Wall Street. "Are you sure about this?" Agnes asked, watching as he coordinated a team of volunteers who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. "There's no guarantee that she'll accept." "I'm not doing this to be accepted," Alex replied, helping to unload another box of materials. "I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do." Miller had secluded herself in her office for the last few days, coming out only to give her regular lessons and check on the progress of the exhibition. Whenever Alex was around, she kept a professional distance that hurt more than any open rejection. On the morning of the exhibition, the center's main hall was unrecognizable. The walls, once stained and worn, now displayed an impeccable finish. White panels created elegant corridors where the works would be displayed, and the carefully adjusted lighting created an almost magical atmosphere. "Ms. Miller needs to see this," one of the children from the art class exclaimed, running through the space. "It looks just like the museums she showed us in the photos." Alex smiled, remembering the endless hours he had spent researching gallery design and proper lighting for exhibitions. His hands, still calloused from manual labor, were a testament to his commitment to transforming the space. "She's already here," Agnes informed us, discreetly pointing to the entrance of the hall. Miller stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning the transformed environment. For a moment, her professional mask faltered, revealing genuine surprise and excitement. "How?" she began, but her voice faltered as her eyes found the center of the hall. There, occupying the most important space in the exhibition, was an installation that made her heart stop. Dozens of drawings of apples, all done by Alex over the last few weeks, formed a mosaic that, seen from afar, made up a portrait of her. Not the superficial portrait he had first seen, but an image that captured her true essence: teaching, smiling, painting, helping others. "Each attempt represents a moment when I learned to truly see," Alex said softly, moving closer. "Each poorly drawn apple is a step on my journey to see beyond appearances." Miller remained silent, his eyes fixed on the installation. "The money from the bet," Alex continued, his voice steady despite his nervousness, "was donated entirely to the center through an anonymous foundation. Not to buy your forgiveness, but because these children, this place, deserve more than crumbs of charity from the bored rich." "Why did you do all this?" Miller finally asked, his voice just a whisper. "Because you taught me that art isn't about perfection, it's about truth," he replied, taking another step towards her. "And the truth is that I fell in love not with the story of the scarred heroine, but with the woman who sees beauty where others see only blemishes, who teaches with patience when others give up, who forgives even when she doesn't deserve to be forgiven." A group of children from the art class approached, carrying their own works to be exhibited. Miller automatically assumed her professional posture, guiding them to their designated spaces. "Miss Miller," one of the girls called out, pointing to the installation of apples. "Why did Mr. Thompson draw so many bad apples to make his portrait?" Miller looked at Alex, who had moved away to make room for the children. "Because sometimes," she replied softly, "you have to fail many times before you can see the real picture." The exhibition was scheduled to start in a few hours. Volunteers were running around, adjusting the last details. Agnes coordinated the catering team, making sure everything was perfect. Miller, Alex called out when he finally got a moment alone with her. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness or a second chance, but I want you to know that every moment here, every callus in my hands, every Bosch drawing was real. More real than any deal I've ever closed on Wall Street." Miller studied him for a long moment, his scars glowing softly under the new lighting. "Do you know what the hardest part of teaching art is?" she finally asked. "What?" "Convincing people that it's not about the end result, but about the process of discovery," she replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "Some people take longer to learn that lesson than others." With that, she walked away to continue her preparations, leaving Alex with a feeling that perhaps, just as her poorly designed apples had turned into something meaningful when seen together, her actions of the last few days could be the start of her own masterpiece in progress. The evening of the exhibition arrived with an electric energy in the air. The Sunrise Community Center was unrecognizable, transformed into a sophisticated but welcoming art gallery. Dozens of people began to arrive: neighborhood residents, local artists, potential sponsors, and to everyone's surprise, some of New York's most important art collectors. "How did you manage to bring these people?" Agnes asked Alex, watching as Eleanor Blackwood, a famous art curator, examined the students' work with genuine interest. "Let's just say that Wall Street taught me some useful things about networking," Alex replied, nervously adjusting his tie. He had opted for a more discreet suit tonight, something that wouldn't make him stand out from the crowd. Miller moved around the room with natural grace, introducing the artists and explaining the stories behind the works. Her simple but elegant navy blue dress highlighted her natural beauty, and for the first time, she hadn't tried to hide her scars with makeup. "This piece," she explained to a small group, "was created by Jason, one of our youngest students. He started in the program after losing his mother to cancer. Art became his way of processing griefs." Alex watched from afar, noticing how she managed to make each person feel special and understood. It was a gift he had taken a long time to truly appreciate. "Mr. Thompson," Eleanor Blackwood approached him, holding out a glass of wine. "That central installation, It's your work, isn't it? Yes, he admitted, feeling strangely vulnerable. My first and probably last attempt as an artist. On the contrary, Eleanor smiled. There's something deeply honest about it. The progression of poorly drawn apples until they form that portrait. It's a powerful metaphor about learning and transformation. Before Alex could reply, a buzz formed near the entrance. Richard Wellington had appeared, accompanied by Marcus and James. No, Alex muttered, moving quickly towards him. But Miller was already there. Welcome to the Sunrise Community Center, she greeted them with surprising calm. Would you like a tour of the exhibition? The three men exchanged confused glances, clearly unprepared for this reception. Miller, Alex began, but she silenced him with a look. Actually, she continued, you arrived at a perfect moment. I was just about to make a little speech of thanks. Miller climbed onto a small makeshift stage, and the room gradually fell silent. Tonight is about transformation, she began, her voice clear and firm. Not just the transformation of this space, but the transformation that art can bring about in our lives and hearts. Her eyes met Alex's for a moment before continuing. A few weeks ago, a man entered the center thinking he could buy redemption. He learned the hard way that some things are priceless. But in the process, he taught us something too, that sometimes people can surprise us if we give them a genuine chance to change. Richard and his friends shifted uncomfortably. The scars I carry, Miller touched his face lightly, have taught me that beauty and value are not determined by appearances or social status. Each mark tells a story of choice, of sacrifice, of love. And looking around this room today, I see countless similar stories of overcoming, of discovery, of second chances. She paused, her eyes sweeping the audience. The Sunrise Community Center received a generous anonymous donation recently. This money will allow us to expand our arts program, reaching more children and adults who need a space to express themselves and heal. But more important than the money was the lesson that came with it, that real change begins when we stop trying to buy solutions and start doing the hard work of personal transformation. Alex felt tears forming in his eyes, especially when Miller smiled directly at him. So tonight we celebrate not only art but also courage. The courage to admit our mistakes, to try again, to see beyond appearances. And yes, even the courage to draw hundreds of appallingly bad apples until you finally see the true picture. The room erupted in applause. Richard, Marcus, and James silently left, but not before James left an envelope in the donation box. When the crowd began to circulate again, Miller found Alex near his installation. You didn't have to do that, he said softly. No, she agreed. But you also didn't have to turn this place into a professional art gallery, or donate $10 million anonymously, or spend weeks drawing horrible apples just to make me smile. They really are horrible, aren't they? Alex laughed, looking at his drawings. Terrible, Miller smiled, lightly touching one of the apples. But together they'd created something beautiful. Sometimes that's how life works too. The charity exhibition at the Sunrise Community Center had become the most talked about event on the New York art circuit over the following weeks. Eleanor Blackwood published an enthusiastic review in the New York Times Arts, especially highlighting Alex's apple installation as an accidental masterpiece of personal transformation. Alex kept a newspaper in his drawer in his Wall Street office, along with his drawing materials. The negotiations and meetings continued, but something fundamental had changed. His clients noticed that he seemed more human, less focused only on the numbers. Mr. Thompson, his secretary, interrupted his thoughts one Thursday afternoon. There's a lady called Agnes asking to speak to you. Alex immediately put aside the documents he was reviewing. Send her in. Agnes entered the luxurious office with the same dignity she showed at the community center, carrying a familiar briefcase. You're missing classes, she said without preamble, taking a seat in the chair in front of her desk. Miller made it clear that he needed space. Alex replied nervously, adjusting his tie. I'm respecting that. Agnes murmured, opening her briefcase. We can respect her space from a short distance. We have a new project at the center. She slid some documents across the table. It was a proposal to expand the arts program to other community centers in the city. Miller developed this plan, Agnes continued, but we need someone with experience in management and finance to make it viable. Why are you showing me this? Because sometimes, Agnes smiled, people need an excuse to do what they really want to do. Alex studied the documents, impressed by the vision and detailed planning. Does she know you're here? Miller knows we need professional help, Agnes replied diplomatically. The rest is up to you. That evening, after hours of reviewing the proposal, Alex drove to the Bronx. It was a school night, and through the windows of the center, he could see Miller teaching her regular class. She had changed her look since the exhibition. Her hair, which had always been pinned up, now fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she wore more vibrant colors. But what was most striking was her posture, more confident, more free. Alex walked silently into the center, stopping at the classroom door. Miller was explaining shading techniques, using ironically an apple as a model. Mr. Thompson, one of the younger students, noticed him first. Have you come to learn how to draw apples properly this time? Miller turned around, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Actually, Alex replied without looking away from her, I've come to offer my help with an expansion project. Agnes, Miller sighed, shaking his head with a small smile. She showed me your proposal, Alex continued, taking a step into the room. It's brilliant, and with a few strategic adaptations we can implement it throughout the city. We can. Miller raised an eyebrow. If you allow it, he added softly. Miller watched his students for a moment, then turned his attention to Alex. Class, why don't we take a 15-minute break? When they were alone, Miller crossed his arms, studying him. I thought Wall Street took up all your time. I've recently learned that there are more important things than financial markets, Alex replied, approaching the easel where she had been demonstrating techniques. Like drawing apples, for example. A ghost of a smile passed her lips. You still need a lot of practice at that? Then teach me, he said, picking up a pencil. Not just about art, but about everything. About seeing beauty where others don't, about second chances, about building something meaningful. Miller took the pencil from his hand, their fingers touching briefly. It's not that simple. I know, Alex nodded, but I've learned that the most valuable things are rarely simple. They require time, patience, and a lot of manual labor. She laughed softly, remembering him cleaning walls and assembling panels. And a few blisters on the hands, especially the blisters on my hands, he smiled. Miller, I'm not here to buy my way back into your life. I'm here because I believe in what you're trying to build. And because even if you never forgive me completely, I want to be a part of it. Miller put the pencil back in the holder, then turned to face him fully. Do you know what the hardest part of teaching art is? Making apples look like apples? No, she smiled. It's teaching people to trust their own process. To accept that every mistake, every botched attempt is part of learning. The students began to return to the room, but Miller continued, tomorrow at 9. We have a meeting with the center's board to discuss expansion. Don't be late. I'll be here, Alex promised, his heart racing at the possibility implicit in his words. As he turned to leave, Miller called out to him, Alex. He stopped, noticing that it was the first time in weeks that she had used his first name. Bring your drawing materials, she said with a small smile. We still have a lot of work to do on those apples. Alex left the center that night feeling something he hadn't felt for a long time: hope. Not the superficial hope of winning a bet or impressing his peers, but the deep and meaningful hope of building something real, even one small circle at a time. In his pocket, the pencil Miller had touched seemed to burn with possibilities. And for the first time since entering that exclusive club months ago, Alex Thompson realized that he had finally won something truly valuable, not despite having lost a $10 million bet, but precisely because of it.